Stories are like glitter, David. Once you get hooked, they stick with you forever, whether you want them to or not. Maybe like husbands. Plus, let us live vicariously through drama without needing to get off the couch or even put on your pants. That's what I'm talking about.
In other words, we can relate to them and we can learn from them. And that's what we hope to do on today's episode.
This is Queer Money episode number 554, and today we're sharing a few of our favorite stories from our new show, Living Not So Fabulously by Yahoo Finance.
Now, on with the show and some stories from another show.
With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions. That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com/bank for details. Capital One, N.A., member FDIC. So we did a survey of the Queer Money podcast listeners the end of last year, maybe fourth quarter of last year, and we asked what you guys wanted more of. And we got a lot of comments. People want actually more stories about the people overcoming financial struggles or sharing wins that they had and that others could benefit from. So we solicited guests to come on the show to share their personal money stories. And what we found is that nobody unless they have something to sell, wants to go on a show and share their money struggles, their money triumphs, what have you. And I don't know why that is. I mean, we've been doing this for almost a decade now. And so it's just second nature to us to talk about all things money, personal and other people's.
Some of our own money fuck ups and how we fix them.
Yeah.
Or haven't fixed them.
But I think just general people don't want to do that. There's an aversion to that, which is quite ironic that middle of this year, 2024, Yahoo Finance reached out to us and said, hey, if you were to do another show with us, what would that show look like? And David and I thought about it for a while, and we thought, if we could do it all over again, knowing what we know now, and if we had the cachet that a platform like Yahoo and Yahoo Finance have, what would we do? And it was maybe, since our community loves celebrity so much, it was maybe if we could get celebrities to come on a show to share their money struggles, triumphs, successes, fuck ups, what have you, then maybe that would get more in the community to talk about their financial situations.
And also, I think it's not just talk about our financial situations, but to look to people that many of us revere or want to be like and realize, hey, they made some money mistakes or they've overcome things. It's possible for me too. And it's also a way for us to say, you don't need to have the shame that people like Dave Ramsey and some people on certain other financial channels want to try to shame you into feeling bad about all of the things that you've done. The reality is that we all have made some money mistakes. Every single one of us has a money story to tell.
And I know that the pushback will be, because we had this before, is that I can't relate to celebrities. I want to hear from real people. The problem is real people don't want to share that. And I would argue that not enough people want to just listen to the real money stories of everyday people that can make a show like that successful. So we have to lean into the celebrity, the business leaders, and what have you, so that it can get enough eyeballs and downloads. And because those folks typically have something that they are also promoting or selling, such as a movie, a book, an album, what have you. Very often you can get those people to come on and share something a little bit personal that the everyday person might not otherwise do because they don't really have a reason to do it. And people have an aversion to talking about money. I mean, it's just people are very afraid of it. So this episode, we're going to share some of our top favorite stories that we've gotten from the Living Not So Fabulously podcast and video show by Yahoo Finance, because one, they're amazing stories and they've really inspired us. And we want to make sure that you hear about it. But we also, to be fair, are doing a little bit of self-promotion and hoping that those of you who aren't familiar with our new Yahoo Finance show hear about it, and then maybe jump on over there once a week and capture the intriguing money stories of the celebrities, activists, artists, business leaders, trailblazers, what have you.
Exactly.
And we got some exciting interviews coming up on that show.
We definitely do. And one of the things that I really love is that we are covering a broad breadth of individuals, right? It's not just your celebrities. We are looking at business leaders and some of the things that they've had to do to get to where they're at. And we're looking at activists and how activists are more than just people who really want to rah, rah, rah and support the community. they also understand that financial literacy, financial empowerment is something that our community definitely needs. And this is one of their ways of being an activist for the community. So our first guest that John and I wanted to share with you is Ruth Jacks. Ruth Jacks is an EVP at Wells Fargo. Ruth Jacks did not start out this way. As a matter of fact, Ruth Jacks shared with us her journey from poverty and why it was that when she said that she, as a young child, she said, I don't want to be poor when I grow up, what that really meant. And that meant that she didn't want to be hungry, because she was hungry as a child. And now she's a corporate leader, and she's emphasizing the importance of visibility and self-worth, especially with folks in the LGBT community. She grew up with scarcity, but it didn't leave her with a scarcity mindset. It actually drove her to wanting to achieve a level of financial success. It's interesting. She shares some numbers about what she thought financial success would look like when she was younger. And it's actually kind of funny how we kind of joke about those numbers. But she is a queer Black woman who overcame significant, not only personal, but also professional challenges, navigating corporate America, and how she struggled with the idea of authenticity and showing up as her full self to work, and what that meant, and how she might have to expose herself.
Yeah, I think it was very striking. She was very, you could tell she authentically felt these stories that she shared.
Yeah.
At times you could see that there were tears in her eyes, and I think you're going to share a story where there actually were tears in her eyes. And it's just, what was very striking to me about her interview, it was that she came from poverty. She came from being hungry. At one point in her life, she was a single mother living on the street. And that was after struggling with poverty growing up as a child. And it's very interesting how some of us have that experience, and we're stuck in a poverty mindset. Yeah. Some of us have even less, arguably less of a struggle than, say, what Ruth had when she was growing up, and have a poverty mindset, whereas she was able to sort of flip it on its head and say, this is exactly what I don't want, and I'm going to do everything I can to do have the opposite result.
Yeah. And I think that emphasizing her whole idea of wanting to encourage people to have full self-worth, she did share a story with us that we were actually we had closed the interview. Fortunately, the cameras were still rolling, and she shared with us the story of having someone come and do some work in her house. And the
construction worker.
Yeah, the man had a tattoo on the back of his neck, and that said unworthy. And she was just startled by that he would go to that length. So she asked him what was going on. Why did he have that? And he shared that at one point in time in his life, he was hugely successful. He had a lot of money, a very happy family, and he had become addicted to drugs, and he lost everything, his family, all of his money.
And I think at one point he was in jail.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was interesting. She talks about how she sat down and talked with him about self-worth and how he is worthy, even though these are the circumstances or the things that have happened in his life. He doesn't need to wear that label of unworthy.
Yeah, it was a very, very poignant, moving part of the interview, even though we all thought it was kind of over. And I think there wasn't really a dry eye in the studio, and the crew that was in LA, I think, were still had some tears as well. So the next person we want to share is actually the first guest that we had on the Yahoo Finance show, Living Not So Fabulously, and that was Jane Sasseen. Jane Sasseen is a business journalist. She's also the co-chair of New Fest, which is New York City's largest LGBTQ plus film festival. But she talked about how shortly after she graduated college and was getting into business journalism, she had inherited some money from, I think, her aunt. I could be wrong there. And she put it in the stock market like you're supposed to do. But unfortunately, shortly thereafter, this was 1987. Shortly thereafter, it was Black Monday. And for those of you who don't know, and for those of you who, I guess, don't want to remember, it was the single largest drop in the stock market history. Single day drop in stock market history. The market lost 22.6% in just one day. And this completely changed the financial services industry overall. But of course, being a younger person investing for the first time, Jane admitted that she panicked. And since she didn't know that much about investing at that time quite yet, she withdrew half of her investment because she didn't want to lose any more money. But for those who have any experience in the stock market, know that it's about time in the market, not timing the market. Even if there's a precipitous drop like that, some statistics that we pulled for you was that the average time to recovery from a 5 to 10% drop in the stock market is 3 months. The average time to recovery from a 10 to 20% correction is 8 months. The problem is people will say, okay, well, if the stock market drops, I'm going to try to get out and I'm going to try to time my way back into the market. But few investors are able to figure out, okay, where exactly is the point that you want to actually get back in the market? Where, where's that plateau, that safe plateau to get back in? Nobody can really predict that, and most investors don't get back into the stock market soon enough to be able to reap the biggest upward trajectory of the recovery of that market. And so the lesson that Jane shared was from her real life experience was, you got to take the emotion out of investing. She was young, didn't know that a whole lot. And this is the first bit of money that she really had. So she was obviously protective of it and wanted to make sure that she was a good steward of this inheritance that she got from her aunt, and of course wanted to use it to improve her life down the road. But she said, you just got to take the emotion out of investing. And this is why we've said over and over again on Yahoo Finance, as well as here, is when you're investing, you need to have an entrance strategy and an exit strategy every single time. Know what those benchmarks are and then respond accordingly, because every investor can get emotional, but you don't want to make decisions with investing, especially when it comes to emotion.
Right. And I think one of the other key points with this is if you cannot withstand a drop in the market of anywhere between 5 and 20%, it is highly likely that the money that you are investing is money that you need in the short term, and you don't want those kinds of drops. If that money is invested and you need it in the short term, in the next year or two, it shouldn't be invested in the market. It should be in something else, so that you don't have to try to wait out those 3-month, 8-month, 12-month time periods. If you need the money soon, make sure that you're setting it aside in some other tool rather than investing it in the stock market.
If it's money that you need in the next year or two, especially, it probably makes sense to put it into a high yield savings account. And for different goals, as we've talked about before on the podcast, set up different sinking funds to reach those different goals.
Yeah. And I think, we always, you all know that Capital One is the sponsor of our podcast, and we continually talk about how Capital One has some of the best rates for not only their high yield saving accounts, but their CDs right now. I think as of the time of this recording, their high yield saving account is earning 4.1%, and I think their CDs are somewhere between 4 and 5% for CDs that are anywhere between 11 and 18 months. So check those out if that's something that you're interested in, or you want your money to be in something that's more safe and secure than in the stock market because it's a short-term investment. Put it in something like a Capital One 360 savings account. All right, so our third guest we wanted to share with you here is Patrick Riley. Now, some of you may know Patrick if you're a longtime listener to our podcast. Patrick was on the podcast, I think, in the first or second season,
episode 60.
Yeah, and he was a field producer for Oprah Winfrey. I think
Actually,
he still does. Yeah, still does some work. He came out on national TV to his family and everyone on that particular episode where they were talking about coming out. He's also the author of the book, That's What Friends Are For. The interesting thing is we asked Patrick to come on on this particular Yahoo Finance Living Not So Fabulously episode because he had a story to share that he was doing everything right, and then he experienced a devastating fire in November of 2021. We all know what was going on then, right? That was right in the middle of the pandemic. And it was during that time period that this devastating fire, when I say devastating, everything he had was gone. Everything. He ran out of his house in his underwear, and everything in his house. He lived in a co-op. Everything was destroyed.
Clothing, art, furniture, nothing
exactly.
left.
And the sad part is that because it was the pandemic, Patrick had spent through the vast majority of his emergency savings, and because of the nature of his work, he wasn't working as much. And so one of the things that he stopped paying for was his homeowner's insurance that had lapsed by 2 months. And during this time period, he was basically left with nothing. And he really shares a very gut-wrenching story, but also the heartwarming part of rebuilding the individuals that came in and helped him, and the importance of needing to be prepared financially, as well as making sure that you are taking care of the relationships in your life, because those were some of the people that were there to help him. And he did highlight the need for sticking with your emergency savings. And John and I, in this episode, basically share 3 tips on what we think you should do when you're thinking about how you pay your bills, so that you are a little bit more prepared for an emergency like this.
Exactly. I think we've talked about this before in the past. You know, the standard recommendation for folks is to have 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses to be able to cover, in finances, to be able to cover your living expenses. The problem for most LGBTQ plus folks, because we can be denied, let go from a job in some situations, or actually, no, that's no longer the case. It's a little bit more subversive that we can be let go for a job. And we do feel a struggle with other challenges, that maybe we should have a little bit more than that standard recommendation. But then on top of that is we don't tend to keep up with the salaries of our straight peers. So trying to do that is a little bit harder too. But this is something that Patrick reinforced. He just said he had the 6 months worth of living expenses in an emergency savings account, but if he had to do it over again, he would have much more. So it may be something for folks to think about, is maybe never stop adding to your emergency savings, maybe kind of contribute to that forever, just in case you have a compounding challenges the same way that Patrick had compounding challenges.
Yeah, I'll add to that. That was something that we did when we started putting money into our emergency savings. And as we were paying our debt off, we were growing it. Even we were still we were each putting in $25 a month. And we kept doing that for a long time. And that's why our emergency savings got to the level that it was, that we actually, because of what happened in 2023 with our business, we had to tap into it because we couldn't pay ourselves for the last 3 months. And it was in part because we had consistently on a regular basis been adding to that in a small amount every single month.
And that was also how he survived some of the pandemic. So the next guest we want to share with you is actually Eric Berger and Dan Amboyer. Eric Berger is the financial advisor for Merrill Lynch?
UBS.
UBS. But Dan Amboyer, some of you may know, he is a famous heartthrob on TV and movies. He's, you might have seen him in Younger, Blacklist, Redemption, and for a lot of us, it's probably most notable from, he played opposite Neil Patrick Harris in Uncoupled, which I think was only the first episode or first half of the episode.
I think it was...
He wasn't on there long.
No, it was he played a love interest, and it was like halfway through the show. I think it might have been like episode 6 or something like that.
And he's recently just in a new music video of our friend. Shoot, I just.
I know, dude. I'm drawing a blank too. Brian Faldudo.
Brian Faldudo, right? Who we interviewed on the Queer Money podcast years ago, and he's actually going to be a guest on Living Not So Fabulously soon. Anyway. Dan is a TV heartthrob, and so he was debating about coming out of the closet publicly because he felt like that's what he should do. He had a husband, they were going to start growing a family, and it just felt like it would be authentic to him. Of course, his agent and whatnot just wanted to caution him that he might lose roles and that might not be the most advantageous for his career, and that they could experience financial challenges from that. They didn't say he couldn't come out of the closet. They didn't advise him not to. It's just they wanted to caution him of the risks. So he and Dan, Dan and Eric, had this discussion, very open about whether or not Dan was going to come out of the closet, and if he did, how was he going to do it? But what was very interesting was that they, fortunately, because Eric is a financial advisor, they had the money discussion. What is it going to take? How do we have to prepare? How much does our emergency savings have to be built up? Anything else that we need to do to be able to cover any hiccups that we might have when you come out of the closet. And what was just really great was that they had this discussion, which is not a discussion that many of us like to have, and not many of us have the same challenges with coming out of the closet as maybe Dan does. But it's still an important discussion to have, and they had the discussion, and that helped them weather whatever challenges they ended up facing.
Yeah, I think it's really important. We know that the statistics recently have shown, I think it's somewhere between 55 and 60% of LGBTQ folks are not out at work.
Mm-hmm.
And if coming out at work is a worry for you because you think that it could affect your job, it could affect your employment, we know that right now, especially in the Biden administration, that they will not, you are not allowed to be fired for being a queer person. But coming out could potentially set you up for a situation where subversively, as John mentioned, that you could get fired. It would be important for you to be thinking in a similar line, talking with your partner or partners, if you have them, about what it is that you need to do to prepare if for whatever reason you were outed at work or you do decide to come out. So I think it's a really important topic, not just for individuals who have these high profile careers. When they came out, I was laughing earlier, when he came out, they came out and there was a 2-page spread in People magazine about how he and Eric were getting married. That's not going to happen to the vast majority of us, but still, we do need to think ahead financially about what those kinds of things can do to us. Our fifth guest that we wanted to share with you is Michael Seldtich. Now, his name may not ring a bell with you, but his work is definitely ring a bell with you. He is a TV and film writer and producer. He originally started his career off, and that's one of the things we primarily talk about in the episode, is that he started his career off in architecture, but he then pivoted to filmmaking due to his frustration with not only slow career growth, but it seemed like he had kind of hit a ceiling with his earning ability, which I think
he said like 3 years in a row, he couldn't break the $50,000 a year mark.
Yeah.
And of course, this is back in the 80s, so $50,000 means a little bit different, but
he's also living in New York City. Yeah. So he then leveraged his skills in architecture, specifically project management and budgeting, that allowed him to get into film and TV. And one of his first breakthrough roles that many people would know him for is that he was the first openly gay director for Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, which John and I both were like, wait a second. It was halfway through the first season that they hired a gay director. Yeah. What the F, right? I mean, why did it take, why was that the case? Here is the story. This show is called Queer Eye, right? So he also has done a lot of other work. He was a director on Catfish and also the show called Architecture School.
He recently just came out with the documentary called Happy Clothes about Patricia Field.
Yeah, exactly.
Patricia Field, you might know, is the clothing designer for
Sex and the City.
Sex and the City and a couple of other popular TV shows. And I think Devil Wears Prada.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So we've all seen their work. So we had Michael. Very inspiring, because I think one of the challenges that we have is that we get so many emails from folks who are like, I'm stuck in my career. Things aren't going the direction that I want to go. And our community, it's just, we just can't get enough degrees, enough advanced degrees, enough doctorates and all that. Like, we're just very obsessed with getting more and more degrees, almost as if the more degrees we have when we die, the more validated that we are. But the problem with that, because of the student loan debt crisis, is that can really put a burden on somebody financially, which makes everything else in your life that much more challenging. And we just love that. And maybe this wasn't necessarily the trend. That wasn't necessarily the trend back in the 80s or 90s, like it is now. But we just loved how Michael figured out a way to pivot into a new career that didn't necessarily require him to go get further education and spend hundreds of thousands of more dollars.
Yeah, exactly.
Finally, the last person or story we want to share with you is a guest who's been on the Queer Money podcast at least twice. He was on the first time on episode 108, is Todd Sears, the CEO and founder of Out Leadership. The reason that we had Todd on, because he has been laid off a couple of times in his career. His big career breakthrough was that he built a $2 billion client LGBT portfolio at Merrill Lynch, and that really opened the eyes of Merrill Lynch of the opportunity that they had with the LGBTQ plus demographic, and it changed some of their policies, and it really opened the eyes for the industry.
And it also opened their pockets, because I think Todd shared with us that in his first year, he was supposed to, as an advisor, bring in $12 million as his book of clients, and he brought in $100 million, and they were surprised by that. And because of that, Merrill Lynch opened up their pockets and basically gave $3 million in various forms to the LGBT community to try to basically say thank you and support the community that was now supporting them financially.
Exactly. So it's very interesting to look at somebody's like chapter 15 and be like, I wish I could be there. Why am I not as awesome as that? But you have to look at like their previous chapters 1 through 14. And you wouldn't know that now necessarily, but Todd has been laid off a couple of times in his career,
twice.
at least twice. And he originally took it the way that we all take that kind of stuff, right? We have this identity with our job. It just kind of makes
Go have three Hendrix gin martinis.
Right. Yeah. He was so depressed. He went and had 3 Hendrix martinis, which
That's a headache after.
made me thirsty that day. And so I just think it's very interesting because we always like, oh my God, these people are so amazing. They don't really have any struggles or challenges. And I think we know intuitively that that's not true, but I think superficially we kind of just assume that everybody else is living an amazing life and that everybody else doesn't have any hiccups or challenges. But it's just interesting to hear a very, very successful person, both in the financial world, but also in the LGBTQ plus community, because he eventually he used one of his layoffs and the severance package that he got from that to found Out Leadership, which is hugely influential in the LGBTQ plus community. So it's very interesting to just hear how somebody was able to sort of use that as a or do they a layup?
I don't know. You're trying to make a sports reference, and I'm not getting the context.
He used that as a instead of a setback, he used it as a setup.
Yes, there we go.
That's what I was looking for.
Exactly. Yeah. So those are the 6 stories we wanted to share with you. We want to encourage you to go ahead and check out these. We will link to these episodes both in the show notes as well as in the podcast player if you're listening, and on YouTube in the description if you're watching.
And hopefully we're not really just trying to market the show, but what we're trying to do is use these as opportunities to have the discussion of money in your life. Use Todd Sears, use Ruth Jacks as whatever. If you connect, whoever story you connect with, or you think your friend or partner or family member will connect with, use these as opportunities to share the stories of other people so that you can start to share the story of your own and get that discussion started about how can we improve our lives financially.
Yeah, I will say one of the things that one question that we get a lot is, how do I get my partner on the same page as me financially? Having something like this show, to listen to these stories, to hear these individuals being open and honest and authentic about some of their financial struggles or their financial wins, gives you the opportunity to say to your partner, hey, how do we do something like that? How do we, I know where we're at financially, or I don't know where we're at financially, so I want us to get onto that path. This is a great way to do that. So
100%.
Yeah. So Living Not So Fabulously is available every Wednesday on Yahoo platforms, including wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as YouTube.
Capital One Auto Navigator does more than just auto financing. We're here to help you find a car you love, too. Shop millions of cars from thousands of dealers nationwide. Research your favorite makes and models. Explore dealers near you and more. All on Auto Navigator.
Thank you again for joining us for another episode. Get your Queer Money takeaway and the resources that we mentioned, all those links from this episode in this week's newsletter. You can scan the QR code on your screen right now, or you can get the link in your podcast player to subscribe to the newsletter.
Then join us this Thursday for another episode of How Gays Retire Fabulously. This week, we're going to cover the 10 best states for LGBTQ plus people. And then join us next Tuesday when we share how LGBTQ plus Gen Xers, those of us who are our age, can start to fund the generational wealth of younger generations. Thank you and have a great week.